It's time for a different flavor puzzle game this week as we take a look at Engacho for WonderSwan, a conversion of the PlayStation game of the same name. The game was developed and published by the super nondescript sounding Nihon Application Corporation and released on October 28, 1999. There honestly isn't much to say about Nihon Application Corporation. Their website looks like it hasn't changed at all since the release of Windows 95, and I can't tell if they're a company that specializes in maintaining legacy systems for large companies, or if they simply haven't ever updated their website. It looks like a vaporwave parody of a corporate website, and yet they're publicly traded on the stock market. It also just looks like a super generic software development shop, and no mention of video game development or publishing exists on their website. Engacho was originally released on the PlayStation, but saw a port in the same year on the WonderSwan, and has a relatively unpopular Android port to this day in the Google Play Store by a company called Cranesmerd. Never heard of them. So what is Engacho anyway? Well, my first impression was that it was a toilet humor version of The Witness, though that is somewhat oversimplified. The basic idea of the game is that there's a map with some number of enemies on them and a goal you need to get to. These enemies have different patterns you need to learn, and you need to come up with a route that gets you to the goal without making contact with those enemies, all under a strict step limit. If you run over the step limit, you need to retry from the beginning. There are 4 different enemy types: a monster with a huge tongue, a flying butt with wings, a man with smelly armpits, and a moai looking thing with a giant nose dripping with snot. There's a fog of war of sorts on these maps, but instead of merely being outside of your vision, enemies in the fog of war simply don't move until you're close enough to them again. Making contact with an enemy will give you an animation of the monster doing something gross to you, and then you start over. Certain enemies can collide with each other, spawning additional enemies, making your job even more complicated. The art used throughout this game has a very distinctive style, and in fact it belongs to Uruma Delvi, a married artist couple who often draw together in this style. The grossness of the game is largely to blame on its name. Engacho is an exclamation yelled by young Japanese children when something gross happens to them, such as stepping into feces, and is often accompanied by a strange gesture meant to symbolize the detachment from the embarrassment of what just happened to them. Stages in the WonderSwan version are similar compared to the PlayStation version, but have been revised to fit into a single screen without scrolling. Graphics are also using a more standard overhead camera like you'd see in a traditional mobile RPG, and not the isometric camera style used like in the PlayStation version. If you aren't bothered or grossed out by this game's aesthetic, there are a few hundred stages in this game to clear, and if you enjoy navigating fields of enemies with conflicting patterns, then this is a great game for you. The game has its fair share of stumpers that will leave you thinking about how to solve it for a day or two, with long stretches of puzzles that can be easily completed in between. It is just such a peculiar aesthetic treatment for such a game, and probably the naughtiest game thus far on the WonderSwan.